Good evening, friends. We are here with one more session of the study circle. I invite Mr. D. Srinivasan to give a welcome and an introduction for today's speakers.
Good afternoon, friends. I am much pleasure in inviting you to yet another webinar conducted by our study circle. Today, we have two good panelists who are well acquainted with the drafting procedures, and therefore, I would request all of you to listen carefully. About the speakers for today, both are my classmates. Let me start with Mr. S. Sivashanmugam. Mr. S. Sivashanmugam and me know each other since 1988 by the time we joined the law college. Siva's family is well known to many of us since we both lived in Annanagar and many of the other immediate seniors and juniors also hail from that area. Somebody who need to make a special mention because whenever we had a joint study at took care of all of us at a appointed time, the meals will come. His mother, who passed away a bit early, also is well known to us. Very caring mother, not only for Siva but also for all of us. His sister is well known to us. She is in US. Siva took his early juniorship under Mr. G. Masilamani, the former president of the Madras Bar Association, the former Advocate General of Tamil Nadu, and former Additional Solicitor General. In fact, he was the first Additional Solicitor General once the position was created at Chennai. Sivashanmugam was a very good student when it came to the juniorship. He adhered to the timings and developed his drafting skills under his senior, who is a stickler to procedures. Everybody must be knowing about his senior. He was government advocate on two occasions, one between 2001 and 2004, secondly between 2008 and 2011. Both the governments benefited out of his skill and preparation. Coming to my other friend and classmate, Mr. S. Rajendra Kumar. Rajendra Kumar is a person whom you can keep on talking, the session might be over. Very, very interesting person to know. If I would say, you people may laugh. He hails from Triplicane, but the day he joined law college, the knowledge of English language was as if somebody from Annanagar or Melapur. He's so good in the language. Not only that, he reads a lot of novels in literature and philosophy. As far as Brother Sivashanmugam is concerned, he is blessed with Balaji, a son who is doing his 12th standard. One more paper in the CBSE board which is pending due to the lockdown, it has been postponed. As far as Rajendra Kumar, my good friend, is concerned, he has two sons. Elder one is completing his engineering, and the younger one is doing his CA finals. Over to both of them. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce these two good speakers. Bye.
We thank you for the kind words, Mr.
Srinivasan.
First of all, we wish to start this session in a different way. That is, we would like to have a sort of a conversation. And at one point, my learned friend will definitely take it over. And then he will hand over the mic to me at an appropriate point. First of all, I would like to raise a question. It's a general question, and more particularly addressed to my learned friend, as to why a person approaches a honorable court, a court of law, simplicity.
Before I could answer to my learned friend Rajendra Kumar, this study material or the speech is intended only to the juniors. And seniors, I could find a few of them. Please excuse us. We may not match your expectation, but still we will try to put our best foot forward. Okay. With regard to starting off with this disclaimer, To answer Mr. Rajendra Kumar's question, a client approaches an advocate to the court through an advocate to get relief or to have his grievance redressed in the law through a legal firm. Well, we will just start off like this. When a client approaches their counsel,
Before you start off, may I take it that he comes to the court to establish his right or to ward off or escape from the liability?
all the three is possible. All the three is possible.
So what, when a person approaches a lawyer, how he should go about?
What, a client or advocate?
A client is coming to you.
So jokes apart, whenever a client approaches a counsel to redress his grievance, as a counsel I have to have a brief session with them to know what's actually taking place, or what he requires, or what is his nature of grievance, and what sort of redressal he requires from the court of law. With this, I will begin to draft or collect the details from the client. And thereafter, based on the information, whatever he gives, I have to collect more details from him, and I have to collect more materials from him through my probing questions. And if time permits, or as a traditional way, I have to write down the each dates and events in a chronological way, so that the facts are put in order.
Oh, I'll recapitulate. You have to probe and then get the required essential details, and you have to impose a time order on these things. That is, in a chronological manner, you have to get the details or write down the details. Then you go about assimilating in your pleadings which you are going to draft.
Yes.
Correct, sir?
So this should be the beginning of the collection of details, and thereafter I may have to prepare a plaint or affidavit or a written statement, whatever way he approaches for. And now straight away jumping to the practice and procedures of drafting a pleadings. So the importance of pleadings has been given by Justice Stable in Pinston versus Lloyds Bank. This is reported in 1941 to King's Bench 1972, where he has succinctly expressed that the function of a pleading is not simply for the benefit of the parties, but also, and perhaps primarily, for the assistance of a court, by defining with precision the area beyond which, without the leave of court and consequential amendment of pleadings, conflict must not be allowed to extend. So this is the idea or the founding principles for pleadings. Now coming here, I'll try to give you the highlights of a pleading or the importance of pleading and what are ingredients the pleading should contain. Before that, you should know the object of pleading. The whole object of pleading is to give a fair notice of each party of what the opponent cases to ascertain with precision the points on which the parties agree and those on which they differ, and thus bringing the parties to a definite issue. Thirdly, the purpose of pleading is to eradicate irrelevancy, ambiguity, and gray areas, so that the parties themselves know where do they stand and what is there left to dispute between them, and what are all the facts they are required to prove during the course of trial. Therefore, they are saved of unnecessary trouble of calling out the evidences and saving the time and money of the both themselves and the saving time of the court. And above all, by knowing beforehand, they are saved from surprises. during the course of trial. So next, going further, what are pleadings? Pleadings is governed by Civil Procedure Code. And Civil Procedure Code from the year 1908 had withstood the test of time. Particularly Order 6, 7 and 8 of Civil Procedure Code deals with the pleadings, as defines the limits and proportions of the pleadings and what it should contain and what it should not contain and how it has to be dealt with and what should be pleaded. All these things are covered under Order 6, 7 and 8 of Civil Procedure Code. And the Civil Procedure Code in Appendix A guides you with the model forms of pleadings. In fact, Appendix A contains 49 types of plaint, 16 types of written statements, or the defenses that are required to be taken for the 49 types of plaints. So, going further, Order 6, Rule 1 of Civil Procedure Code defines what is meant by pleadings. In Order 6, Rule 1, pleading means plaint or written statement alone. Of course, there is this both terms, plaint or written statement, is not defined in CPC. But if you go further, there are several judgments or judicial findings to the effect. They give you the broad outline of what a plaint is. There are a description of the plaint or written statement, and they are defined as follows. Plaint means a statement of claim called as the plaint, in which the plaintiff sets out his cause of action with all necessary particulars. And written statement means a statement of defenses called the written statement, which the defendant deals with every material fact alleged by the plaintiff in the plaint, and also sets new facts which are in his favor, adding such objections as he wishes to take to the claim and to rebut the averments and allegations made in the plaint. So this is the broad outline of plaint and written statement. Now going further, what are all the contents of the plaint as contemplated under Order 7, Rule 1?
Well, does the plaint should conform itself to one particular format?
Yes. That is given in Appendix A of CPC. So I will just move out what are all the contents of the plaint as contemplated under Order 7, Rule 1. So it should contain the name of the court in which the suit is likely to be brought in. Then the name, description, and the place of residence of plaintiff. Then again the name, description, and place of residence of the defendant, so far as they can be ascertained. Where the plaintiff or defendant is a minor or a person of unsound mind, a statement to that effect. Then he has to narrate the facts constituting the cause of action and when and how it arose. Then the facts showing that the court has got jurisdiction to try this case and take it up this one. Then comes the relief claimed by the plaintiff. Then where the plaintiff is allowed to set off or relinquish a portion of his claim, the amount so allowed or relinquished to also be stated there in the plaint. Then again the statement of value of the subject matter, suit for the purpose of jurisdiction and court fee, and so far as the case admits. So these are all the broad outline how what the plaint should contain. Now moving further, the written statement. Written statement is governed by Order 8, Rule 1. And what are all the normal defenses taken in the plaint, in the written statement are, it's a denial of whatever has been stated in the plaint, so far as it is denied by the defendant. And he can make a protest by making the part admission and part denial of whatever stated in the plaint. Then
Whether the
limitation.
denial should be specific or general?
No, it has to be specific. Both plaint, I will come to that. Both the plaint as well as the defendant written statement has to be very specific as to the events and incidences and the dates. The third is limitation. though under Section 5 of the Limitation Act, that point of limitation need not be specifically pleaded by the parties, but still it would be better if the defendant who has to rely on the point of limitation should take it up and narrate how it is barred by limitation. At least prettily, he has to state that. Then fourth is denial as to the jurisdiction, both territorial as well as the pecuniary. And fifth is if the plaintiff or other one is minor or incapacitated in any manner, that has to be stated. Then sixth is in the case of suit for specific performance or other things, it would be better if the defendant pays the money into the court, whatever the balance sale consideration or the advance amount he has received, to prove his bona fide, let him deposit in the court, and to file a performance remittance vacate. Then sixth is rescission, seventh is res judicata, and eighth is estoppel. These are all the standard defenses that are required to be taken in the written statement by the defendant. Now, moving further, we have dealt with the written statement, and coming back to the written statement, there is a time frame for filing a written statement in the regular suits. The regular suits, the time frame for filing the written statement is 30 days. Though this 30 days is not to be strictly followed as per the Honorable Supreme Court decision reported in AR 2002, Supreme Court 2487, Rameshwar Lal versus Daya, in which the Honorable Supreme Court has held that Order 8 Rule 1 provision is directory in nature, and even after the expiry of the stipulated period, court can extend the time to file the written statement. So therefore, we can file a written statement even after the period of 30 days. Now there comes another question. Then next comes the another pleadings, subsequent or additional pleadings. This comes after the filing of the plaint and written statement. What is meant by subsequent and additional pleadings? So these two pleadings come into force or takes place after the filing of written statement. Subsequent pleadings is subsequent pleadings is filed as a matter of right without leave of the court. Subsequent pleadings are governed by Order 8 Rule 9, and without leave of the court, the subsequent pleadings cannot be filed. They are normally called as replication pleadings, and they are governed by Order 8 Rule 8 and Order 8 Rule 9. These deals with subsequent and additional pleadings.
Whether the court will call for you to file additional pleadings, or you yourself seek the permission of the court and then file it?
There are some subsequent events which takes place after the filing of the suit, or some new fact emerges that can be filed by way of an additional pleadings after obtaining the leave of the court.
But court can also call you.
Yes, court can also ask us to file the additional pleadings. So now coming back to the fundamentals of pleadings, a case is bound to succeed or fail based on the pleadings. The pleadings are not in order. Wherever it go or whomsoever we engage or the client engage, it's bound to fail unless the pleadings covers the essentialities of the cause of action, case, and the relief sought for by him. So the fundamentals of the pleadings, I will just narrate one by one. As such, in India, there is no specific form of pleadings, both in the written statement, plain written statement, and as well as the affidavit. But there are certain fundamental rules regarding the pleadings, and they derive their source from Order 6 Rule 1 of CPC. And the fundamental rules are narrated as follows. Every pleading must state only facts and not law. Second, it must state all material facts and material facts alone. It must state only the facts on which the party pleadings relies and not the evidence by which they are to be proved. Or in other words, the evidence and evidentiary value or the importance of evidence of a particular document need not be pleaded at all. But to mark those documents, there should be a pleading in place. Fourth, it must state the facts concisely but with precision, specifically so as to avoid unambiguity in the pleadings. Now coming back to each of the clauses, and finally, the dates, sums, numbers shall be expressed in the pleadings in figures as well as in words to avoid the ambiguity.
Is there any deviation from this rule?
Yes, I will narrate it as and when we proceed with.
Oh.
So this is a initial thing. Now I have to elaborate all the five points, or at least 4 points. I need to elaborate it. When it comes to the question of when it comes to the fundamentals, fundamental number one is facts and not law need to be pleaded. The first fundamental rules of pleading is it should not contain provision of law, nor conclusion of mixed question of fact and law, nor should be alleged in the pleadings. Pleading should be confined only to the facts. It is for the judge to draw the assumption and inferences from the pleadings. There are exceptions to this rule of pleading only the fact and not law. What you have sought for, SRK? These are all 4 or 5 instances in which you have to plead the law also on the following instances. These are all only exemptions, not rule. General rule is that you have to only plead facts and not law. But exceptions are as follows. While you are dealing with a foreign law in which the Indian court or the Indian judiciary is not aware of it, you have to specifically plead and prove the existence of foreign law, because it is not up to the court to take a judicial notice of a foreign laws, and hence it has to be specifically pleaded as facts. And when you are pleading either as either in the plaint or in the written statement, it subsumes the level of fact, and it has to be set forth in the plaint substantially as any other facts. Then the second point is when the question of mixed question of fact and law, where the question is one mixed with law and fact, it is permissible and proper to plead both facts and legal conclusion. For instance, the defendant may say that the suit is barred by law of limitation, or he may say that he is entitled to set off after narrating the facts on which he bases his conclusion. So this is a mixed question of fact and law, which cannot be delineated from each other, which is inseparable. Therefore, in these circumstances, both the fact and law has to be specifically pleaded. Third is a condition precedent that is governed under Order 6 rules, Order 6 Rule 6 of CPC. That a condition precedent is there for performance of which is intended and to be contested. It has to be distinctly and specifically pleaded by the plaintiff or the defendant. This is contemplated under Order 6 Rule 6 of CPC. Then next is customs usage of particular trade. When we come across several suits, a money suit for instance, they have got a separate usage or the trade which takes place, say by giving the checks or by pre-signed undated checks as a guarantee, or they give it as advance, or they give the checks in advance, they pay the entire amount, then they collect back the checks. That's what normally takes place. And that apart, there are some peculiarities, each identifiable to that particular trade, say gold or diamond or any trade, for which the court or advocates, we do not have any idea how it's a trade parlance or trade takes place. The customs usage of any trade shall be pleaded like any other facts if the party wants to rely on them. But a customs repeatedly brought before court, it has to be deemed as it is regularly deemed to have been acquired the force of law and need not be pleaded. Second point is, if there is a particular trade practices or business which are at variance of a contract law or any substantive law, but still is got the customary value, then such custom has to be specifically pleaded both in the plaint as well as in the written statement, because now you are going against a substantive law of contract law or any other law in force. Then in the event of negligence, availability of right or liability, unlawful or wrongful act, fraud, misrepresentation, breach of trust, undue influence, and other specific grounds we are taking up. All these things has to be specifically pleaded with, if possible, with the dates, and the events has to be narrated, and it has to be specifically pleaded.
Talking about the
Who comes later?
particulars.
Yes, sir. Now, when it comes to the second question, we have to plead only the material facts and facts alone. Now comes the tricky question: what is the fact and what is a material fact? Whatever client says and whatever you accept it as fact, but all the facts need not be proved or pleaded. Sometimes it may be usually contrary or contradictory, or it is not totally unnecessary or irrelevant to the case which is at our hands. So what is meant by material facts? Material facts is dealt with Order 6, Rule 2 of CTC. And a rule that the material fact should be stated is a fundamental because an omission to mention it may increase the difficulty of the court task to ascertain the rights of the parties. Further, each pleading must state facts which are material at the present stage of the suit. The material fact is the fact which is essential to the plaintiff's cause of action or to the defendant's defense, which each had to prove or otherwise fail is a material fact. That's, am I making myself very clear what is meant by material fact? Okay.
It is otherwise known as fact.
No, come again. No, I can't hear you.
Some facta probandi.
No, I will come to the facta probatio and facta probantio will come later. That is there. Now, the question is, what is material fact? I will again repeat. The fact which is essential to the plaintiff's cause of action or to the defendant's defense, which each had to prove or otherwise fail their case, is called as material fact. It can be safely said, fact is material for pleading of a party which is bound to prove during the trial, unless admitted by the either other side, because he can succeed in his claim or defense. If one is in reasonable doubt about a particular fact as a material fact, it is better for him to plead that fact rather than take the risk of not pleading or getting his case dismissed or not able to file a document in the in future. Again, for example, the plea of fraud or misrepresentation of suit, it should set forth all the details. All the details with regard to the fraud and misrepresentation will constitute material facts. We can't afford to lose it. With this regard, what is meant by material fact? The Honorable Supreme Court in 2004, 3 SEC, page number 137, Sapan Subtio Sabal versus Assistant Charity Commissioner, has stated the word material facts show that facts necessary to formulate a complete cause of action must be stated. Omission of a single material fact lead to an incomplete cause of action, and the statement or plain becomes bad. The functions of particular is to present a full picture of the cause of action with such further information in detail as to make the opposite party to understand the case and what he has to meet. So this gives a fair idea of what is meant by material fact. The exceptions to this rule is, I will again coming to the material fact and its exception. Exceptions are twofold. You have to show the contents of a document. Wherever the contents of a document are material, it shall be sufficient in any pleadings to state the effect thereof as briefly as possible without setting out the whole or any part thereof, unless any precise words thereof are material. Second is matter of inducement. When it comes, it means introductory or prefatory facts which should be stated in the first and second paragraph of the body of the plaint or in the written statement. Though it is not necessary, yet it is desirable to commence a plaint with some introductory allegations stating who the party is, what business they carry on, how are they related to, how are they connected with each other, how do they know each other, and what is the circumstances or surrounding circumstances which led to the dispute or which led them to give money and which they are now asking, and what is their relationship. All these things will add up when it comes to the question of proving their case. So these are all not technically material facts, but these are all the facts which will strengthen your case to prove your relationship or the act or the cause of action which forced you to file the suit. So when the question of comes to matter of inducement and other things, these things will carry more weight. Then third is facts and not evidence. What is to be pleaded is facts. The third fundamental rule of pleading is governed, again laid down in Order 6, Rule 2 of CPC. It says that every pleading must contain a statement of material facts but not evidence by which they are to be proved. Here the question comes of facta probanda and facta probentia, which you have asked for. The material facts on which the party relies are called as facta probanda. That is the facts to be proved, and they should be stated in the pleadings. The evidence or facts by which facta probanda are to be proved are called as facta probentia, and they are not to be stated in the pleadings. The facta probentia are not facts in issue, but they are only relevant facts which will prove at the trial to establish the facts in issue. These are all governed by section 5 to 55 of the Indian Evidence Act. 5 to 55 of Indian Evidence Act deals with facta probentia. For better appreciation, I can straight away cite one judgment reported in 2007, 3 SEC 617, Virendranath Gautam versus Satpal Singh and others, wherein the Supreme Court has said the distinction between the facta probanda, that is the fact required to be proved, that is material facts, and facta probentia, the facts by which they are to be proved. It is settled law that pleadings must contain only facta probanda and not facta probentia. The material facts on which the party relies for his claim are called as facta probanda, and they must be stated in the pleadings. But the facts by which the facta probanda, material facts, are to be proved are called as facta probentia. They need not be set out in the pleadings. They are not facts in issue, but only relevant facts required to be proved at the trial in order to establish this fact in issue. So again, this facta probanda and facta probentia, I made myself clear now. I could not see many. I don't know. Okay. And these are all the three important points. And the fourth is, again, facta probentia. Facta probanda is the material facts, and facta probentia is the evidence through which the facts, material facts, are required to be proved. And facta probentia is covered under section 5 to 55 of the Indian Evidence Act. Then again, the fourth and final point is how the pleading should be. The pleading should be in a concise form with precisions, specifics, and it should be unambiguous. The material fact must contain in a summary form, succinctly, and its strict chronological order. All unnecessary allegations and the details should be omitted to attain brevity in pleadings. Again, that's why at the beginning of this session, I told you whenever the client approaches you, though it's not, I don't know how many are following, but still, coming from old school, you have to write down the dates and the events in a chronological order. Even if the client jumps here and there and jumbles with the facts, the moment you put pen in paper and take down the notes, you know where there will be some lacking gap, or the facts would be missing, or there would be some obvious voids, or fill in the blanks should be there. And those blanks should be filled up through probing questions. Maybe inconvenient for the plaintiff. He may hide details or bulk details, but still, you have to get all these things from him. So that once you put the dates and other events in the chronological order, it becomes easy to narrate the material facts. And you can plead in the succinctly in the plaint, as succinctly as possible in the plaint. The moment you put it in the very brief form, there you are avoiding two things. One, you are dealing with very precise pleadings. Second, you are covering all the specifics that are required under the substantive law that required to be covered. And fourth, you are third, you are not becoming unambiguous, or unambiguity in the pleadings is being taken away. Here, unambiguity, ambiguity pleadings is sometimes it may be mutually contrary or contradictory pleadings may be made. That mutually contrary and contradictory pleadings may be made by the defendant, but not by the plaintiff. Plaintiff should be very clear of his case.
Is it possible without the knowledge of the substantive laws,
No,
be it collection of or collation of material from the parties through probing questions, as you put it? Is it possible? What to
No.
ask? Suppose I do not know what to ask.
No, it is not possible. See, with, practically speaking, when you file a suit, you are not filing a suit in an overnight, as you are filing in a writ petitions. Writ petitions, you can file in a day or two. Am I audible?
In a trice.
Hmm?
People come at the last moment. Injunction suits are made ready in half an hour's
When
time.
it comes
or 1
to
hour.
injunction suit, it's almost like I don't want to comment. Which I don't want to comment. But still, knowing of substantive law through which you seek relief is a condition precedent for even for filing an injunction suit.
Please explain what is the substantive law for injunction, declaration.
I thought you would be answering that question. Anyway, specific relief or specific performance act. Then
A specific relief act.
specific relief act. Largely, it is bound. It is all the suits that the injunction suits are specific relief act, where you are attempted to be dispossessed by a third party who has no right to enter the property. Is normally those suits are filed only in the injunction suits. Again, and the last of the thing is, this is practically speaking, whomsoever is very prevalent with Sandelian's book or Sandelian book, any book for that matter, I request them not to follow that books and the contents of that book while writing a plaint. Normally, it contains 2 pages or 3 pages. One single paragraph will run to 1.5 pages. So please don't follow that type of pleadings at all. One, it is.
There used to be one writer called Maraimalai Adigal. One whole page, one sentence.
Yeah. Please don't follow that. No, I have not read Maraimalai Adigal. I don't know. I have read Sandelian. that much I know. Please don't follow that type of pleadings at all. Pleading should not exceed maximum 9 to 10 lines for each paragraph. Within that, each 10 lines, you have to narrate one particular instance or event as simplified as possible. And when it comes to the next event, you have to take it forward to the next paragraph, so that there is some clarity of thought and clarity of understanding, so that when you read a plaint in a whole and cohesive manner, you can understand what you wanted to say and what is your case is about. And another thing you have to follow it, as much as possible, use the active voice and don't use the passive voice in the pleadings. those active voice and passive voice and other grammar will be dealt with my friend SRK in short time from now. Then the second event is whenever you are narrating one particular person, say around, say for example, my name Tyagarajan. This Tyagarajan is arrayed as second defendant. You cannot keep on changing the names. At one paragraph, you cannot say he. Second paragraph, you cannot say as Tyagarajan. Third paragraph, you cannot say as second defendant. So you have to have some sort of order. Once you start addressing as either a second defendant or Mr. Tyagarajan, you have to address throughout the plaint either as second defendant or as Tyagarajan. You cannot interchange the words, so that unnecessarily time need not be spent on finding out, suddenly rummaging through the records. You would like to know who is the second defendant and who is Mr. Tyagarajan and what is this alleged act. So thus I have to say that the pleading should be very concise, it should be very precise, it should be very specific, and it should be unambiguous. And these are all the fundamental principles of pleadings in a plaint. Now coming back to the other issues, what are all the things you should avoid or omit from the pleadings? So I have stated what are all the things you have to state, material states in the plaint. Now I am saying, I am going to say to you what are all the things or what are all the events or what are the things that you are required to omit from the pleadings. The first thing you have to omit is the matter of law. Questions of law you have to omit. Then again, matters pertaining to evidence you have to omit. Matters not alleged in the opponent's pleadings. Say for example, if you are filing a written statement, what are all the things you are not narrated in the plaint, you cannot add in your written statement. That because one thing, it's unnecessary. Second, it does not help you in any manner. Third is performance of condition precedent. Then as much as possible stick to the words used in the documents. If you are filing a suit based on a document, whatever the terms and words and phrases used in the document, try to stick on to that. It may be grammatically wrong or it may be technically wrong, but still you have to still stick with that phraseology. Then you need not plead what are all the matters affecting the cost of the case, and what are all the matters or materials that are not going to either strengthen or weaken your case, that are not material to the relevant or material or irrelevant to the case, need not be pleaded. Then defendant need not plead to the prayers of the plaintiff, and defendant need not plead to the damages claimed or to their amount. These are all the points are only indicative in nature, and it does not confine what should be pleaded and what should not be pleaded. These are all only the fundamentals of the pleadings and what the pleadings should contain. Now I leave the floor to Rajendra Kumar to say what a good advocate should bear in his mind while drafting a pleadings, and also with regard to the grammars.
Can you put the slide?
Yeah.
Taking from where my learned friend has left. See, he has been narrating so many things. To recapitulate, only material facts have to be pleaded. One exception is wherever fraud, misrepresentation, and other things, Order 6, Rule 4, that is particulars to be given necessary, where necessary. In all cases in which party pleading relies on any misrepresentation, fraud, breach of trust, willful default, undue influence, and in all other cases in which particulars may be necessary, beyond such as exemplified in the forms aforesaid, particulars with dates and items if necessary shall be stated in the pleading. So this is one thing. we are deviating from the earlier rule. Now, what a good advocate should bear in mind while drafting the pleadings is describe the names and places accurately with the proper spelling, and it should be followed throughout the pleadings. That is one thing. Then the avoiding of pronouns, he, she, it, they, that, all these things should be avoided so that it can bring in some clarity. You can address, you can call them by name or the plaintiff or defendant throughout the pleadings. Then if specific defendant by name should be called or addressed, that should be incorporated. Then neologism, that is called as neologism, that is coining of your own terms, is not at all required. You are not Krishna here, therefore simple words, the words as mentioned in the particular statute should be used. No ifs and buts. If that has happened, then this would have happened. All those things should be avoided. The complex sentences should be completely avoided. You must break the complex sentences into simple sentences so that who has done what to whom should be narrated in the pleading. Then repetition. It's called as tautology. That should be completely avoided. Many judges resent this kind of thing. Even if you argue for the second time, then why are you repeating yourself? That is what they say. Then they will say your entire pleading is repetitive also, they will say. Then there should be separate paragraphs. As my friend pointed out, I think ideally it should be 5 sentences with a central idea. That alone should be used in a pleading. Then of course it has to be signed by the parties, advocates. Then wherever there is a corporation, then the principal officers, one of the principal officers can verify the pleadings. Now, as my learned friend pointed out, there is one formalistic aspect to the pleadings, then contents. The form is short cause title, long cause title, then contents, then cause of action, court fee paragraph, then reliefs, verification. If at all the relief is concerning with immovable property, you must sufficiently explain the immovable property, sufficient to identify the property. That is a must, because otherwise it will give problem even if you win the case, and ultimately when the decree is put into execution, it is going to pose problems to you. So the immovable property has to be explained thoroughly. Get the details, get the earlier documents, then make enquiries and then incorporate proper description of the immovable property. Then whenever immovable property is the subject matter of the suit, you must also get a patta. Patta should be given along with the plaint. That is a must. Then if a suit is brought under a particular statute, whatever facts which are necessary to bring that suit under that statute should be completely stated in the plaint. For example, take for example a suit based on a promissory note. Suit on a promissory note. Now, what are all the things that are necessary? You advance loan, the defendant executed a pro note, you demanded the amount, because pro note, you know, on demand. You made a demand, there was a refusal, and therefore you are coming to this honorable court. So these three things are the essential facts should be proved. And of course, prefatory or introductory facts, how I came to know about that person, what is the reason for my advancing the loan, can be stated also. So that is a prefatory or introductory facts. Then the essential facts are only these three things. And these two things are going to be the documents which you are going to file. One is the pro note, then one is the demand. So this statute, you must have a preliminary knowledge, or as my friend pointed out, condition precedent. That statute should be known to you. If you happen to know 118, that is the presumption under the Negotiable Instruments Act, it is all the more wonderful. My learned friend, Mr. Sundar Mohan, has already taught you about the presumptions under 118, how it is offset by 114 of Evidence Act. That is a different aspect altogether. Then when we are talking about exception, we have to say wherever there is an exception to the general law. Then alternative pleas, my learned friend has put as alternative pleas. Alternative reliefs also can be, whether you can seek alternative reliefs based on the same set of facts. That also can be raised. Now, I can advise youngsters, not all seniors here, you can reverse engineer. Instead of going from top to bottom, you can reverse engineer. That is, from the relief portion, you can go to work out your way up to the top. That is, what are all the parties against whom we are going to ask the relief, where we are going to ask the relief, what is the relief we are going to ask. That can be formulated in our mind. Then we can reverse engineer also. That is one of the things. Shiva, next.
I think you are going for grammar hereafter.
Yes.
Okay. Before he goes to the grammar or under English literature, whatever he wants to do it. Two other things I have left out that will constitute a very vital role in hereafter or in near future. Now, whenever the plaint or written statement is being prepared by you, a draft has to be sent to the client. Now, given the days, you have to send it through email, and wherein you have to specifically state that please go through the contents of the plaint or written statement and give your acceptance or approval for the said pleadings. And that email has to be preserved by you. Because given the days, if the case goes bad, the client may turn back and to say that I have not pleaded all these things. If the events are not to his liking, it goes against him.
One danger is, and if he is not agreeable to the fees you are quoting, he will take the draft to another advocate, have it filed.
It's part of the game. But still, to save ourselves from the future litigations like Consumer Forum and other proceedings, it's better to get the approval from the client. The draft for you have prepared, either the plaint or the written statement, either in the electronic format or in the actual paper. So along with the date, you get the your plaint or the draft approved by the client and preserve that copy. So that will save us in future in our rainy days.
I recall one thing when I was a junior under Mr. K. Yamanan. Mr. K. Yamanan used to get the signatures of the chief examination. In those days, chief examinations, you have to conduct chief examination in the court. On the earlier day or in the earlier night, the party will come, he will sign in the proof. Those were the days. We used to get the signature of the party that this is what he is going to utter in the box, witness box?
Don't make us too old. 1 second.
Yes.
Okay. Now over to Rajendra Kumar.
Yeah. No, for clarity in writing the pleadings, wherever possible, it is advisable to engage active voice. That is, see, ultimately we are, for affidavits, we write it in the first person. It is the third person in the plaint. Now, active voice, the subject is clear, who is doing what is very clear. So, avoid passive voice and employ only active voice. That is, I have done this. I sent a representation. Instead of writing a representation was sent by me, it takes more words and sometimes it would lack clarity also. Therefore, wherever possible, active voice should be preferred.
Are you going to give examples?
I've already given, I think. See, the examples are, see in the examples of passive words, if was received, is being considered, has been selected, it actually reverses the natural order of the English language. The regulation was written by the drafter. Active voice, the drafter wrote the regulation. So this is more understandable, comprehensible than the passive voice. The material was delivered. It raises so many questions. By whom? By whom the material was delivered? Or the start date is to be decided. Again, by whom? The figures must be approved. By whom? The messenger, instead, if we put the messenger will deliver the material, we understand an actor performing a duty. The contractor will decide the starting date. The administrator must approve the figures. So we know who the subject is and what action he is performing. Therefore, this renders more clarity to our drafting. Multiple words instead of using singular words. We have given some examples, like we have given anxious consideration to. Instead, we can say, I considered, and it is applicable to. Instead of using this applicable to, we can say it applies to. Make payment. The simple word is pay. Then give recognition to. That is, simply it can be put as recognize. It is concerned with. We can write concerns. It is called as nominalization. That avoiding nominalization, we not only reduce the number of words, but also the much needed clarity. And insofar as the word shall is concerned, it is a very confusing.
No, I just sorry to interrupt. By using these words, you are making the sentences smaller, and thereby the paragraph also smaller.
Obviously, definitely. Then instead of using shall, which actually imposes an obligation to act, it is often confused with prediction of future action. That is why will, must not, should, may, those can be used. We can use must. We can avoid using shall also. Then instead of saying the governor shall approve it, we can say the governor will approve it. Then we can be direct also. Here, our audience is going to be only the judges. You know, their attention span is getting smaller and smaller as days grow by. Therefore, there is an impending need to talk directly to our consumers, that is the judges. Therefore, we must say, or the examples here are not meant for judges. We can say it, sign all copies. Instead of all the copies should be signed. Then attach a copy of your W2 to your return. Instead of attaching of W2 return would be appreciated. Therefore, we are using crisper, shorter, and easy to understand terms. Then, wherever possible, we must use only the present tense. A regulation of continuing effect speaks of as of time you apply it, not as of the time you draft it or when it becomes effective. For this reason, you should draft regulations in the present tense. By drafting in the present tense, you avoid complicated and awkward verb forms. See, here also, by using the present tense, we achieve directness, crispness, short. By making pithy sentences, we achieved it. That is putting it together and putting it across, we say. You can coin it, that is called putting it together, so that putting it across becomes easier. So let us not say the fine for driving without a license shall be $10. We can say the fine for driving without license is $10. Then positive sentences would achieve the same purpose. The governor may not appoint persons other than those qualified by the personnel management agency. Is not only long-winding, it can be conveyed in a very simple way, like the governor must appoint a person qualified by the personnel management agency. So again, we achieve clarity. But if we are using it to caution the reader, we can use it. That is, don't walk, don't smoke. That and all is possible. But we must avoid saying the demonstration project, Shiva konjam lift pannunga, will not be approved unless all applications requirements are met. Now we can simply convey it as a demonstration project will be approved only if the applicant meets all requirements. So negative terms can be stated in a positive way. That is, instead of saying not honest, we can always say dishonest. Did not remember, we can use one single term for forgot. Did not pay attention to can be used as, can be replaced with ignored. Did not remain at the meeting can be stated as left the meeting, or he is playing truant அப்படின்னு சொல்லலாம். But that is again another.
Again, passing here, interrupting here, can I ask question? Can we use too many negative things like too many nots in the same sentences?
Definitely that should be avoided, because double negative will never achieve anything, because minus into minus will always convey as plus, but you can instead say it as a plus. That is why all persons except those 18 years or older can be conveyed as each person under 18 years of age. These are all examples only. See, we have culled out so many examples. Now I'll move on to split infinitives. That is, after to, we must always use the present verb, present tense verb. But many writers, even now, many persons, even in England and USA, they say promptly reply, sure to promptly reply. two replies should come. They put promptly before reply. That is why it is called as split infinitive. Now, instead of saying be sure to promptly reply to the invitation, we can say be sure to reply promptly to the invitation, or say be sure to reply to the invitation promptly. Then singular noun should be preferred for plural noun. Then the guard will issue security badges to the employees who work in building D and building E. That could be stated in a simpler manner, like the guard will issue a security badge to each employee who works in building D and each employee who works in building E. So unless we mean the guards will issue a security badge to each employee who works in both the building D and building E. But that is long winding. Therefore, and we must also always be consistent. We should not use different words to denote the same things. See, one thing comes to mind, that is, one person has written, in order to avoid the same words, the first list has come to an end. The second suit has has been settled off. The third piece of litigation ended in our favor. Instead of saying, see, suit, a piece of litigation, list, we can use the same thing wherever possible. The variation for the sake of variation has no place in regulation writing. This is more concerned about the regulation. Using a synonym rather than repeating the precise term you entered just confuses the reader. Therefore, each motor vehicle owner must register his or her car with the automobile division of the Metropolitan Police Department. Doesn't convey anything at all. We can simply say each automobile owner must register his or her automobile with the automobile division of the Metropolitan Police Department. Then different things, that is, the tank had a 200-gallon tank for fuel. Then the tank is repetitive, therefore the tank had a 200-gallon fuel container. That could be used.
Interrupting here, what we really wanted to convey is don't use the same word to denote two different things. Don't use the same word to denote two different things.
See, the earlier example I told you, that is all three words, list, suit, piece of litigation. All these three things refer to the same thing. But the reader or the consumer would be definitely confused. What do you mean by suit? What do you mean by a piece of litigation? What do you mean by another term which we employ, list? Therefore, we can say all three suits have ended in the following manner. Suit A, so suit B. There we can resort to listing trick, that it could be listed, paraphrased or subsumed under one capital. That way we can bring in more clarity. So here, parallel construction, non-parallel construction is there. The duties of Executive Secretary of the Administrative Committee are to take minutes of all the meetings. Then again, the Executive Secretary answers all the correspondence comes. Then writing of monthly reports. But we can say it with the duties of Executive Secretary is to take minutes, to answer all the correspondence, to write the monthly reports. So we can avoid two things here. Then we can prefer simple words. See, however hard we try, no, we go on with our own mistakes only. But it is advisable to prefer simple words, which we have already seen earlier. Government writing should be dignified, but doesn't have to be pompous. The pomposity comes in just to show off. And please be advised that plaint is not the place where you can show off your literary skills. Plaint is a place where you have to convey a definite meaning with a certainty, preciseness, because you are playing with the life of another person's. Maybe his liberty or his property may be concerned. Therefore, we must be very, very careful in choosing, in preferring simple words to convey what is intended to be conveyed. So these are all the terms. I think, Shiva, we can give this to people instead of me uttering all those things. Huh?
Okay. Now, totally it comes to 17. What are all the things that are required to be followed, and what are all the things that require to be omitted or to be set off, or we need not be followed. Oh, this marks the end of the civil litigation, other practice and procedures in civil litigation, and touching upon the grammar or the fundamentals that are required to be followed while drafting a pleading. Now, with this, I think we can, both myself and Rajendra Kumar will move back and forth in a conversational manner to take away few
Siva,
doubts.
you can come out of the share screen mode,
Yeah.
so that we can see your face
Yeah.
as it is.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, okay. So this comes to an end. I think that's another session is also there, practice and procedure in drafting affidavit in the writ petition. I think we can share it to the members if they want. Now I think we can have a freewheeling discussion with Rajendra Kumar as to the English writing and other things, generally talking about the pleadings. Say, Rajendra Kumar, you have more affinity towards English than me. I despise two people who are Ren and Martin, who you adore.
I am flattered.
That part I have to agree.
Flattering cannot take you anywhere.
It's not the flatter. Okay. So, coming from a very saying that very lesser exposure to English language, what should be your advice to the juniors if they seek to improve their linguistic skills? Or plain-ஆ சொல்லணும்னா தமிழ்லயே படிச்சுட்டு வந்துட்டு தமிழ்லயே யோசிச்சு திடீர்னு வந்து இங்கிலீஷ்ல பிளைண்ட் எழுதுறா, ரிட்டர்ன் ஸ்டேட்மெண்ட் எழுதுறா அப்படின்னா they have some trouble in translating their thoughts to English language. That's what I often found with my students.
Sorry, both gentlemen, can you just raise your voice a little bit, because you're moving to and fro. Because of that, the voice is getting disturbed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Am I making myself clear now? Sound loud and clear, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Say, I will put it again.
I got you.
No, others did not get it. That's what Ashok says. Okay. Say, தமிழ்ல திருப்பி வரேன். இப்ப தமிழ்லயே வந்து தமிழ்லயே யோசிக்க வச்சு தமிழ்லயே யோசிச்சுட்டு இருக்கோம். தமிழ் or whatever your mother tongue is. Then you are trying to translate your thought into an alien language like English, where you have some difficulty in choosing the words or winding of sentences. How to get over these things? Initial hitches.
தமிழ்லயே சொல்ல போனா எழுவாய் பயனிலை செய்யப்படு பொருள் அப்படின்றதுதான் ஒரு சென்டென்ஸோட ஸ்ட்ரக்சர். எழுவாய் என்பது நானா இருக்கலாம், ஒரு சப்ஜெக்டா இருக்கலாம். என்ன செய்ய போறதுன்றது பிரெடிகேட். எழுவாய் பயனிலை செய்யப்படு பொருள், அதுல என்ன ஒரு காரியம் செய்யப்படுகிறது. நீங்க தமிழ்ல வந்து இந்த ரைட்டிங் குறித்த விஷயங்கள் இல்லை என்று நினைக்கிறீர்கள் என்றால், நான் ஒரு இதை படிக்கிறேன். ஒரு சின்ன செய்யுள் தான். யார் எழுதினார்னா பவநந்தி அடிகள்னு ஒருத்தர் எழுதியிருக்கிறார். நன்னூல் அந்த நூல் பேரு. அதுல 12வது பாயிரம் 10 விதமான குற்றங்களை சொல்றாரு. என்னன்னா, குன்றக்கூறல், மிகைப்பட கூறல், கூறியது கூறல், மாறுகொள கூறல், வழுச்சொல் புணர்த்தல், மயங்க வைத்தல், வெற்று என தொடுத்தல், மற்றொன்று விரித்தல், சென்று தேய்ந்து இருதல், நின்று பயன் இன்மை, என்று இவை ஈரைங் குற்றமாமே, குற்றம் 100K அப்படின்னு சொல்றார். 10 விதமான குற்றங்களை பவனந்தி அடிகள் வந்து ஒரு நூலில் இடம்பெறக்கூடாதவை என்று சொல்லுகிறார். என்னன்னு பார்ப்போம். குன்ற கூறல்னா விளக்கமா சொல்லி புரிய வைக்க வேண்டிய ஒரு விஷயத்த மணிரத்னம் படம் மாதிரி சின்னதா சொல்றது. ஏன் எப்படி அப்படின்லாம் நீங்க பார்த்திருப்பீங்க. மிகைப்பட கூறல் அப்படின்னா நம்ம ஆளுங்க பயங்கர எக்ஸ்பர்ட் இதுல. ஒரு சாதாரண விஷயத்த ரொம்ப பெருசா விவரிச்சு ஹைப்பர்போல் இங்கிலீஷ்ல சொல்லுவாங்க, ரொம்ப பெருசா எக்ஸாஜரேட் பண்ணி சொல்றது. தென் கூறியத கூறல், இது வந்து நேராவே புரியும், சொல்றதையே திரும்ப திரும்ப சொல்றது. தென் மாறுகோள கூறல், முதல் பேரால ஒரு விஷயத்த சொல்லி கடைசி பேரால வேற விஷயத்த சொல்லி முதலுக்கும் கடைசிக்கும் ஒரு சம்பந்தம் இல்லாம பண்ணி விடுறது மாறுகோள கூறல். வழுச்சொல் புணர்த்தல், அதாவது தவறான சொற்களை யூஸ் பண்றது. நம்ம இப்போ பிளெயின்லயே நம்ம சொல்ல வேண்டிய ஒரு விஷயத்த சொல்லாம விட்டுட்டோம். We are supposed to avoid intemperate language. ரொம்ப டீசென்டான லாங்குவேஜ்ல, ஏன்னா நம்ம ஒரு சாலம் பிளேஸ்க்கு வந்திருக்கிறோம், அந்த பிளேஸுக்கு உரித்தான வார்த்தைகளை தான் நம்ம உபயோகப்படுத்தணும், நம்மளோட பிராதுல இல்ல பதில் இல்ல. அதே மாதிரி மயங்க வைத்தல், இததான் சொல்றானா இன்னொன்னு சொல்றானா அப்படின்ற ஒரு மயக்கம் வர மாதிரி பண்றது. தென் வெட்டென தொடுத்தல், அர்த்தம் இல்லாத வார்த்தைகள்ல போடுறது. தென் மற்றொன்று விரித்தல், சொல்ல வந்த விஷயத்தை விட்டுட்டு வேற ஒரு விஷயத்துக்கு போந்து பண்றது. அப்புறம் சென்று தேய்ந்து இருதல், ரொம்ப ஜோரா ஆரம்பிச்சு கழுத தேய்ஞ்சி கட்டை எறும்பா ஆன மாதிரி போறது. நின்று பயன் இன்மை, யாருக்கும் இல்லாத ஒரு வெட்டி மேட்டரா போறது. இந்த 10 குற்றங்கள் வந்து எந்த ஒரு நூல்லயும் இருக்கக்கூடாதுன்னு ஒரு 2000 வருஷம் முன்னாடியே தமிழன் எழுதி வச்சிருக்கோம். சோ இதெல்லாம் இல்லாமலாம் இல்ல, எல்லா லிட்ரேச்சர்லயும் இந்த விஷயங்கள் இருக்கின்றன. ஒரு பிராது எழுதணும்னா அதுல ரெப்படிஷன் இருக்கக்கூடாது, தெளிவா எழுதணும், நல்ல சொற்களை பயன்படுத்தணும், சொல்றது புரியணும், ஒன்னு ஆரம்பிச்சுட்டு இன்னொன்னு போகக்கூடாது. நம்ம இப்ப சொன்னது எல்லாமே இதுல இல்லாமலாம் இல்லவே இல்லை. நம்ம இவ்வளவு நேரம் டிஸ்கஸ் பண்ணது எல்லாமே இந்த ஒரு பாட்டுல இருக்கு. இன்னொரு பாட்டு எழுதி இருக்கிறாரு, என்னன்னா அது அடுத்த பாட்டு.
இல்ல வேண்டாம் இல்ல நிறைய क्वेश्चंस வந்துகிட்டு இருக்கு. We will just skip it.
Thank you.
Now the question is with pertains to junior. No, one question.
Sir.
இப்ப நான் வந்து டிரான்ஸ்லேட் பண்றதுல வந்து என்ன பண்ணா பெட்டரா இருக்கும்னு தான் நான் உன்ன கேட்டேன். நன்னூல்ல என்ன சொல்லிருக்குங்கிறதுக்கு அது அப்புறமா வருவோம். These are all things to avoid. That is stated in நன்னூல்.
இல்ல நான் என்ன சொல்ல வந்தேன்னா, தெளிவா சிந்தித்தா நம்மளால எளிதா ஆங்கிலத்தை ஈஸியா புரிஞ்சுக்க முடியும். தமிழ்ல ஒரு தெளிவான சிந்தனை இருந்தாலே போதும். அதற்கான வேர்ட்ஸை நீங்க சர்ச் பண்ணி போட போறீங்க, அவ்வளவுதான்.
The question is translation. The translation from your mother tongue to English, one that takes time. So what is your suggestions to improve that translation speed and accuracy and to have proficiency?
படிப்புதான் சிவா, படித்து கொண்டே இருக்க வேண்டும் தான்.
எதை படிக்கணும்னா
லிட்ரேச்சர், ஏதாவது ஃபிக்ஷனோ நான் ஃபிக்ஷனோ இல்ல பேப்பரோ, ஒரு நல்ல தரமான ஆங்கில பேப்பர், ஹிந்து அதோட சென்டர் ஸ்ப்ரெட்ல வர எடிட்டோரியல்ஸ், இதை வந்து பக்கத்துல ஒரு டிக்ஷனரி வச்சுக்கின்னு படிச்சோம்னாலே நாளடைவுல, ஏன்னா சொற்கள் தான் நம்முடைய ஆயுதம், இதை வச்சுதான் நம்ம எல்லாத்தையுமே செய்ய போறோம், பேச போறோம், எழுத போறோம், கன்வின்ஸ் பண்ண போறோம், எல்லாமே இந்த சொற்களை வச்சுதான். சோ இந்த சொற்கள் வந்து நம்முடைய சேமிப்பு கிடங்கில் நிறைய இருக்கணும். அதற்கு படிப்பு ஒன்றுதான், வேற வழியே கிடையாது. there is no shortcut.
ஓகே,
கூடவே கிராமரும் கத்துக்கணும்.
அவர் வந்து ரொம்ப இலக்கியத்தரமா சொன்னாரு, நான் அதை கொஞ்சம் சிம்பிளிஃபைடா சொல்றேன். You can start off with some English light novels.
Yes.
எனக்கு வந்து நான் செகண்ட் இயர் படிக்கும்போது ப்ரொஃபசர் ரங்கநாதன் என்னோட இங்கிலீஷ் மாஸ்டர் ஒருத்தர் எனக்கு சொன்னாரு, and that I followed it for some time, and that's how I could pick it up few tricks here and there. What he advised me to start off with a novel.
No, I disagree. You have not picked up the.
Okay, we will have our conversation separately. Leave it out. Say, what he suggested is take one particular novel of your choice. Say some author. So I can recommend you. You can go if you are going to start reading English novels. You can start with Alistair MacLean, then go to Jeffrey Archer. Then you can, if time permits, you can go to Frederick Forsyth. Then Graham Greene. These are all the good English authors who have good command over their language, fictional writers. Or if you want to go for new authors, most of them are psychological authors. I can't recommend them. You can learn new words. I can suggest you one thing. When you start reading an English novel, have a dictionary near to you, next to you. Whenever you stumble upon a new word or fumble for a word which you don't identify or which you cannot relate to, you take the dictionary, refer to it immediately, so that you know the meaning of that particular word and under what context it is being used. Then, if time permits and if you still want to improvise yourself, take the guide of Thesaurus, where you have synonyms and antonyms for one particular word. They will give you 10 words.
I want to chip in here.
Yeah.
Thesaurus is the opposite of dictionary.
Yes. Yes.
You know the meaning, but you do not know the word. Then you have to go to the thesaurus.
Yes. Now, next comes the next problem: how to pronounce those words. When we started off, we don't have the we never had the guide of this app, which is now abundantly available in all the phones. I can only recommend the Oxford Dictionary app. That's good, in the sense that that's what I am using it for the last 4 years, where it comes with the speaker also. When you put a word, type a word, it not only gives the meaning of that word, but it also says how to pronounce that words. Thereby, you don't have to embarrass yourself by mispronouncing those words. And that way, you acquire a confidence on what you speak. Though you may not be grammatically correct, or you need not learn grammar in the manner where my learned friend has read. So, next, now I am open to the questions.
Yes, gentlemen, those who want to ask any questions may raise your hands.
It seems.
Siva, can you go through the Zoom chat, or first you want to see the questions on the hands which are raised? As of now, I don't see any hands raised up.
No. One lady has raised the hand. Now, Prashant has raised a question. What is the danger of long winding pleadings that is in vogue these days? How does it affect the trial? SRK.
The long winding pleadings, they might start off with one thing, and the end, they might have ended up with one thing. So, what one gets is often a confused thing. Therefore, he may not be knowing what to prove and what not to address the court.
Or in other words, he will start off with one thing, end up with another thing.
Yes.
Okay. Next is Divakaran Mohan. He has raised a question. How can a junior improve his drafting? He can't expect drafting opportunities every day. Something junior can do on everyday basis to improve drafting every day. So I will rephrase the question. Say, what are all the things a junior has to do to improve his drafting skills?
நம்ம பேசுறதே அதுக்கு தானே.
இல்ல அதை திருப்பி கொஞ்சம் எக்ஸ்பிளைன் பண்ணிடா.
I think you'd be the best person.
I think we have fairly covered how to improve your language skills.
Okay, then can I just take it forward?
Yeah.
See, there are questions. One is that, should the defendant state the allegations of the plaintiff one by one and deny each and every allegation? So this is commonly we find in many pleadings. Is it required?
It is
Either
required.
of you.
Yes, it is required, sir. Senior sir, it is required because the rule says specifically so. We have to conform ourselves to the rules.
So therefore, when filing a written statement, apart from whatever you are saying, you have to take up what the plaintiff has said and deny each and every one. Right. The point is that in many cases, what you will find is that one paragraph of the plaintiff will be verbatim repeated in toto, and they will say, "I deny that." Is it required to that extent?
No, no.
According to me, it is not
Extracting the
required.
entire pleadings in the plaint and
No,
then
it is
saying,
actually speaking, it is not denied. We can simply say it in I deny the contents found in para number 9 or whatever para it contains. I do not admit the averments contained in the. I more specifically deny these averments. Or there should be some material fact in that particular paragraph. We can deny that.
okay,
Specifically
there
deny it
is
if you want
One
to
more
deny
thing,
that
sir.
one.
I'll add one more thing. There is a difference between mere denial and refutation. Refutation is we must state something of our story also. We must state some of our story. Therefore, that gets offsetted.
okay.
Yeah,
Next,
that
next
also we
kind
can
of
add.
clarification.
Yeah.
No, you just wait for what. Next kind of clarification which is sought is that we want the pleading should be simple. Does that mean that we should stop using grammar or use sentences something like which we do it in SMS and WhatsApp language?
Absolutely not.
If it is permitted and accepted by the court, you can still use it. I know who the author
That is
is.
not
Still.
confused. We cannot. Grammar is essential because it is the grammar which lends life to the things. So a cluster of words cannot exist on their own. We must attach it in a syntactic manner, in a syntagmatic manner. Therefore, syntax is essential. So that one sentence alone can convey one particular meaning. Rama killed Rama, Ravana, maybe 3 words. But only when we say Rama killed Ravana, you have that clarity or some conveying, the meaning is conveyed.
Urgency.
Okay. See, one of the participants has said that a junior requires to be improving on a daily basis. You have also suggested that you need to keep reading books or newspapers, editorials, everything. Is there anything specifically you will say junior need to do?
Privy Council judgments are very short, a pity. Therefore, they can start off with the pre-independence or up to
So judgments prior to 1950 is what you suggest at the first instance. Juniors can keep reading.
Yes.
If they can lay their hands on. If not, they can go through all the judgments or most of the judgments prior to 1980.
Okay.
Supreme Court.
Supreme Court.
Okay. Now, one of the participants has put in a suggestion saying that read law journals regularly. Do you vouch for the view?
Hmm.
Okay, we'll go to the next question.
Certain things left unsaid.
No. As a suggestion, with some
See,
experience, you can also tell the juniors that reading law journals
No,
regularly
reading
is
law
also a good
journals is
thing.
not going to waste your time. You can understand the present position of law and what are all the reasons which prompted the judge to decide in that particular manner, that we can know. And we can also know the march of law. I can suggest them to read the articles that comes under in all the law journals, either CTC or AAR or MLJ or Indian law ILI. ILI is one of the good institute that comes out with good articles, or SCC articles, or if they are very much interested, I can suggest a few blogs. One, Mr. Gautam Bhatia of Supreme Court runs an excellent blog. Most of his blogs are very thought-provoking, and I can say it's outlandish, and it's, to some extent it's very hypercritical of Supreme Court and its judgment, though he practices there.
Okay.
Those
We have
blogs, if you go regularly, that way we can improve our language.
Okay. We have Mr. Vaidyanathan raising his hand. So Ashok will unmute him so that he.
I've unmuted him, sir. Mr. Vaidyanathan, you have been unmuted. You can raise your question.
Still showing us mute.
Okay,
He has
sorry.
to. Yes.
Is he there? I think he has left or something.
No, he is there. He is there. He is there.
Yes,
Video
Mr.
is on.
Vaidyanathan, you may please unmute yourself and ask your question. Yes.
Yes, he is there.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, please.
Sir. Good evening, sir. Sir, one question. In the written statement, if we plead each and every paragraph, if we deny the paragraph, because which have to deny it in the plaintiff, if you want to mention the paragraph number, so I am, if for instance I am denying the paragraph 6. If you want to mention in the written statement, I am denying the paragraph 6 for the submission. Is necessary?
Fully necessary. You must say, with respect to the allegations made in paragraph 6 are concerned, I deny the same for the following reasons. சொல்லி நீங்க உங்களோட விஷயத்தையும் சொல்லலாம்.
சொல்லிடலாம். அப்படி பண்ணிக்கலாம். இப்ப நம்ம இப்ப டெனி பண்றது ஒரு பேராலையும் நம்மளோட ரீசன் சொல்றது அடுத்த பேராலையும் எழுதணும். இல்ல ஒரே பேராலையும்
நீங்க ஃபர்ஸ்ட் உங்களோட ஸ்டோரியை ஃபர்ஸ்ட் கூட சொல்லிடலாம். Then I will deal with the governments in the following manner சொல்லி ஒன்னொன்னா போட்டு கூட டினை பண்ணலாம். It is according to you.
சார் அது ரெண்டு வழி இருக்கு சார், ரெண்டு வகை இருக்கு. ஒன்று வந்து இந்த பேராகிராஃபை இந்தந்த காரணங்களுக்கு, இந்த பேராகிராஃபில் இருக்கிற அலிகேஷன்ல இந்தந்த காரணங்களுக்காக நான் மறுக்கிறேங்கிறத நீங்க எழுதிடலாம். இல்லைன்னா இந்த பேராகிராஃபை நான் மறுக்கிறேன், இல்லைன்னா உங்க ரீசன்ஸ் எல்லாம் சொல்லிட்டு இந்த காரணங்களுக்காக இந்த பேராகிராஃப்ல இருக்கிற அலிகேஷன்ஸ் எல்லாம் என்ன கட்டுப்படுத்தாது, நான் அதை மறுக்கிறேன்னு நீங்க எழுதலாம். ஆமா, ஏன்னா ஒரு ஸ்பெசிபிக் ஹார்ட் அண்ட் ஃபாஸ்ட் ரூல்னு எதுவும் கிடையாது உங்களுக்கு.
எப்படி பேரால நம்ம சொல்லணும்னு அவசியம் கிடையாது.
ஓஜென்ட்டா, அதாவது சீரியல்லாம் வந்துட்டா உங்களுக்கு நாளைக்கு ஈஸி. இப்போ நாளைக்கு திடீர்னு நீங்களே ஒரு 3 வருஷம் 4 வருஷம் கழிச்சு கிராஸ் எக்ஸாமினேஷன் வருதுன்னு வச்சுக்கோங்க, கொஞ்சம் தள்ளி எழுதிட்டீங்கன்னா நீங்க உங்களுக்குள்ளே அந்த சீரியல் கண்டுபிடிக்கிறதுக்கு சரியா வராது, குரோனாலஜி வராது உங்களுக்கு. அந்த சீரியட்டமா எழுதிட்டு வந்துட்டீங்கன்னா உங்களுக்கு அது நாளைக்கு டக்குன்னு படிக்கிறதுக்கோ இல்லை ஆர்கியூ பண்றதுக்கோ இல்லை எடுத்து ரெஃபர் பண்றதுக்கோ உங்களுக்கு ஈஸியா இருக்கும். ப்ராக்டிக்கல் பர்பஸஸ் கொஞ்சம் ஈஸியா இருக்கும்.
ஃபைன் சார். ஒன்று இன்னொன்று வந்து அந்த கிராமட்டிக்கல் சொல்லுவீங்க, ஆக்டிவ் வாய்ஸ் பாசிவ் வாய்ஸ். கிராமட்டிக்கல் நம்ம லீகல் ஓரியன்டா நம்ம அதை ரைஸ் பண்ணிக்கணும்னா எது நீங்க சஜஸ்ட்? கிராமட்டிக்கல் பிராக்டிஸ் லீகல் ஓரியன்டா நம்ம டிராஃப்டிங் எது பிராக்டிஸ்?
தமிழ்லையா?
நோ இங்கிலீஷ்ல.
சார் அப்புறம் ஒரு ரென்னன் மார்டின்னு ஒன்று இருக்குது
சார், அது
அதெல்லாம் வந்து இப்போ போய் ரொம்ப எலிமெண்ட்ரி. அதை இப்போ கொண்டு போய் படிக்க சொன்னீங்கன்னா யாராலையும் முடியாது. இன்ஃபேக்ட் அவங்க 2 பேரும் எனக்கு பிடிக்கவே பிடிக்காது. அதுக்கு நீங்க பெஸ்ட் வே என்னன்னா, உங்களுக்கு பிடிச்ச ஏதாவது ஒரு இங்கிலீஷ் நாவல் எடுத்துக்கோங்க, ஸ்டார்ட் ஆஃப். ஸோ அதுலேருந்து உங்களுக்கு புரியாத வார்த்தைகளெல்லாம் எடுத்துக்கோங்க, அது கொஞ்சம் கொஞ்சமாக படிக்க ஆரம்பிச்சிங்கன்னா உங்களுக்கு கொஞ்சம் அந்த படிக்க உங்களுக்கே வந்து அந்த சென்டென்ஸ் ஃபார்மேஷன் உங்களுக்கே தெரிஞ்சிடும். ஸோ உங்களை அறியாமே அந்த வர்பு, ப்ரோனவுனு எல்லாத்தையும் நீங்களே அதை that will come in order.
Fine sir. அது one thing. இன்னொன்று வந்து whether the drafting and argument oral argument நம்ம பண்றல, whether this is different from this or they are both are same.
Reading இல்லாம ஆர்குமெண்ட் இல்ல சார்.
அது ஓகே சார்.
ரீடிங் இல்லாம எவிடன்ஸ் இல்ல, எவிடன்ஸ் இல்லாம ஆர்குமெண்ட் இல்ல.
இல்ல நான் என்ன சொல்றேன்னா, ஆர்குமெண்டோட வெர்ஷன் வேற மாதிரி நம்ம பிளேஸ் பண்றது வேற மாதிரி இருக்குமா, இல்ல டிராஃப்டிங்ல இருக்கிறதே தான் நம்ம பிளேஸ் பண்ணாலே போதும்? தட் மீன்ஸ்
ஐயோ, எழுத்து என்பது வேறு, பேச்சு என்பது வேறு. எழுத்தின் அடிப்படையில் தான் நம்மளோட ஆர்குமெண்ட்ஸ் இருக்க போறது. ஏன்னா எவிடன்ஸே உங்களோட இந்த ப்ளீடிங்ஸை பேஸ் பண்ணி தான் இருக்க போகுது. ஏன்னா இதற்கு மீறி நீங்க எந்த எவிடன்ஸும் விட முடியாது. இதன் அடிப்படையில் தான் நீங்க உங்களுடைய வாதுரைகளை செய்ய வேண்டிய வரும்.
நன்றி நன்றி நன்றி. Thank you sir. Thank you.
Ritika Ashokpati is there raising the hands.
I have unmuted.
Welcome.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
So I was wondering how statements like "now this agreement witnessed herein" would hold relevance anymore, considering that this statement is not only archaic, but in the literal language sense, it also means that agreement is actually a witness. So is that a right way of going about things?
There are certain things we follow blindly. This is one among them.
Right.
It lost its redundancy long back,
All right.
but still we are clinging to it.
Now there is a movement is going on in England and USA, a plain English movement for lawyers. Now they have abandoned all those things, but we are still continuing with the age-old archaic practices, unfortunately.
So can I say that it is something like a privileged legal writing? So we would like to always have that.
See,
Don't make it so simple so that common man steps in and
No,
you
that's
don't
one
have
of
a
the reason. Say if this is purely off the cuff or off the thing remark. What happened? The advocate's fee is dependent on number of pages he fills up. That was the initial practice. I am talking about the 19th century beginning. So the wordings and writings should be very verbose, repetitive, and very long. So based on the number of pages or number of paragraphs used to charge. So and that should be the one of the reason we are still clinging on to that age-old practices.
Just to add to that, my view is that sometimes it reminds you what is required. For example, in an agreement, if you say in witness whereof, it is something like for a practitioner, it's a remembrance always that if there is an agreement, ensure that after the execution there should be witnesses to that. So some words I feel that it has got relevancy. It is a principle which keeps us updated on certain things.
Perceptions differ.
Any other questions?
Perceptions differ. Yeah, Prashant has raised, will the trial court experience helps in any improving your pleading? Will practice straight away in the High Court adversely affect the strength of your pleadings? Prashant, to answer you, I started off with the High Court, then moved on to City Civil Court. And I don't know where do I stand.
So here I have to say one thing. The previous, before the proof affidavit, now we have to take chief examination in the open court. Now, what my senior has told me is, you follow the cause of action paragraph. With that, you can have the cogency, all the material facts and the documents which you have to, you keep the document set and the cause of action. With that, you can easily take chief examination. That's what he has told me.
Yeah, Saravanan is here.
Ashok, no, once again, Om has to conclude, I think. Om, anything left? You're muted. Sorry. Unmute yourself. Yeah.
Our speakers for the day were suggesting that people can read some novels, small basic novels, and names which Mr. Siva has given. In fact, I have not touched in my life forever. So my request to the speakers for the day is, can you put in some Indian authors or some known authors, simple. I read a lot of Ruskin Bond, simple sentences when he describes about things, everything. Books are also small. When you speak about novels which are bulky, you don't get it.
No.
Something like that, can I ask the speaker?
No.
Don't again say perceptions change. You please put in something for our benefit.
No. I will come to that. Say you can start off with Alistair MacLean. Alistair MacLean is long dead. But still, his books will not exceed 200 to 300 pages.
I wanted some authors of Indian literature
Then you
or
can
Indian.
go for R.K. Narayan.
Okay.
R.K. Narayan. I think not much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I thought Ruskin Bond or R.K. Narayan will all. So may I invite Mr. Saravanan to conclude the session with a thanks to our speakers.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, friends and colleagues. As far as civil cases are concerned, pleadings can be regarded as backbone of any judicial system. A successful lawyer must know the basic principles of drafting of pleadings. A well-drafted pleadings plays a very vital role to get justice for the clients. Unfortunately, in these days, drafting of civil cases is messed up with tailor-made or custom-made pleadings as available in certain summary proceedings. I would like to recall my senior late K.T. Paul Pondian, who used to say that a legal drafting should be like a closed form as far as drafting of civil cases are concerned. One must see that everything is intact when the form is closed, but at the same time, you should have a feeling that there is nothing when the form is opened. I remember my senior had taken 6 months' time to draft a pleading in a shipping matter. When the suit came up for hearing, Mr. K. Parasaran, senior counsel, who appeared for the defendant, had inquired my senior as to how much time has he taken for drafting the plaint. That is how the pleading should be. Mr. S. Rajendra Kumar and Mr. S. Sivashanmugam advocates have articulated their presentation by way of question and answers on the basics of pleadings, relevant procedural rules, case laws on those ideas and skills in placing pleadings and drafting based on their long and practical experience. It was a wonderful narration by Sivashanmugam as to how he derives the requisite details from the parties who approaches him before commencing the draft. Mr. Rajendra Kumar has stressed that the language of draft shall be plain and simple without any complex sentence. He had also referred to a Tamil literature as to the importance of clear and cogency drafting. In fact, the presentation of both the speakers stimulated all my legal sense, and I staunchly believe so from all the participants who had spent their precious time and energy and also triggered mood. I thank one and all the participants. My sincere thanks to Mr. D. Srinivasan, advocate, who had addressed the welcome. My appreciation to the host of this webinar, Mr. G. Ashokappa, the advocate, who had very well managed the digital dais with all modesty. Thank you for the success of this wonderful session. Thank you.
One thing before I finish, that's again a Tamil couplet. Sittiramum kaipalakam, sendamilum naapalakam, vaitador kalpi manapalakam. So this should be the guiding principles for us. So to those advocates who asked, he has to draft and improve it, this should be the answer. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.